Accountancy Age's 35 under 35, sponsored this year by AJ Chambers, aims to showcase the accounting industry's top talent, placing a spotlight on young UK professionals who have made an outstanding contribution to both their firms and the profession. Joining me today to discuss the future of accountancy is a handful of this year's 35 under 35 winners, including Harry Briggs, Director at KPMG, Jessica Teague, Partner at Ecovis, Wingrave and Yeats, Stuart Millar, Partner at Greaves, West and Ayre, Meera Shah, Senior Manager at Buzzacott, and we are also joined today by Matthew Lawford, Operations Director at AJ Chambers. Welcome everybody, thank you for joining us. So just to sort of kick things off, obviously all of this year's winners made the cut because of your exceptional contributions to the profession. But as we all know, within the accountancy industry, it's obviously driven by strong relationships between both your teams and clients. And often these relationships that we all have with those that we work with ultimately define our careers. So I wondered if we could just start by talking a little bit about some of the key people and experiences that you've all had that really shaped your careers and ultimately helped you excel within the profession.
I'm an audit partner and I've primarily been in audit during my career at Ecovis. I've been at Ecovis since I was a graduate, and I've worked with a variety of different businesses and really inspiring clients. But I think for me, the partners here, both past and present, have been a real inspiration to me. And without them, I wouldn't be where I am. They have given me so many opportunities and have really supported me during my career. And although I have primarily been in audit, I did have a 7 months secondment at Hastings Direct, which came at a really good point in my career. And it really showed me sort of the other side. I'm working in industry. And I think that's really helped me as well continue on to be an audit partner. So I've got really kind of varied experience in seeing things on both sides, which was great. So I've been really lucky in those opportunities that I've been given personally.
And Jessica, I wondered if you could just sort of maybe detail some of the key people that have kind of took you under their wing and just helped you really kind of, I guess, take those next steps in your career within the profession.
I think actually I'm quite lucky that I've worked with all of the partners, but I suppose particularly the audit partners at Ecovis who have sort of taken me to meetings and shown me how they do things. They've shown me how they've formed judgments, which is obviously a key part of my role. And that's been really helpful in kind of giving me the opportunity and the experience that I needed to get to where I am today. So I think it's probably, a lot of people giving me the time and support rather than one particular person for me personally.
Yeah, and Harry and Stuart, do you have kind of any sort of anecdotes of just people or just experiences that have really defined your career within the profession?
Yeah, I do. So my background is audit as well. So I sort of came up through the audit ranks up to RI, and then I began to specialise in ESG and ESG reporting, which is where I spend all of my time now on reporting and assurance within that space. But I remember specifically when I was at the manager grade, I went on a training course, which was a regional course for a week, and it was actually in Rome in Italy, so it's pretty nice anyway. But it was run by our global head of infrastructure, and the guy spent the entire week there with us. And he's probably one of the busiest people I've ever met. He's kind of going around for KPMG in all sorts of different countries and things. Huge demands on his time. And for him to sort of take an entire week of his time out and dedicate it to our development was incredible. Just as a gesture, it kind of made you stop and take notice. But then, when you actually went through that, some of the kind of key things that came out of that course for me really changed the way I approached my career. So I think the penny that dropped was one of the things he said was, you've all got strengths and weaknesses. And if you focus all your time on trying to improve your weaknesses, you're probably only ever going to be average at those things because you're weak at them naturally. So don't worry too much about them and focus on your strengths because you're already good at that. So make that your kind of key area of focus. Manage the weaknesses and stop them being an issue, but focus your time on the strengths. And that really kind of flicked a switch in my head and totally changed the way I approached my career after that point.
And same question to you, Stuart. I mean, was there any kind of people that really stood out that helped kind of define your career path within the industry?
Yeah, no, there definitely is actually. I mean, I was personally kind of taken under the wing of one of the sort of partners at the firm who's very much sort of general practice, and kind of specialise a lot in sort of strategic tax planning and capital tax planning and things like that. So I personally had come from a sort of audit focused background, and I trained in audit, and so when I qualified as an audit senior, so when I moved to Greaves Western Ayre, I was very sort of inexperienced in the sort of tax and strategic planning and things like that. But one of the partners kind of took me under his wing and kind of gave me responsibility for a sort of a good volume of work in terms of sort of report writing, and he kind of allowed me to take the lead on sort of client technical work, corporate restructuring in terms of demergers and a lot of sort of corporate tax as well as sort of capital tax planning. So by doing that, he kind of very much kind of oversaw the work that I was doing, allowed me to sort of get involved in some of the client, direct client-facing work, sort of creating the overall strategy with his guidance. So whether it be sort of that nature of work or right the way across, some of our other service lines, there's very much been there's very much sort of path to success here, in the sense that they've very much got a focus on succession more than anything else. They're kind of aware that as a sort of mid-tier, medium-sized firm of 120 odd staff, that the key to future success is making sure that they nurture that through. So I've been very much a sort of beneficiary of that, in the sense that they're keen to see me succeed, in order to sort of promote the future success of the firm. So no, definitely there's been a couple of partners. I work, I have in the past worked for a number of them, but there's very much one in particular that kind of took me under his wing, which is kind of behind my sort of success so far, definitely.
Yeah. And I think building on this as well, so obviously Matthew and I kind of sifted through so many nominations this year, over 200 for the 35 under 35. And one of the things that was very common was that so many of this year's winners and nominees clearly took a leading role in supporting graduate trainees, as well as new entrants into the profession, and ensuring that there's a level playing field for all candidates from no matter what sort of set of backgrounds they have. I wanted to ask all of you, and again, maybe you'd be the prime person to kick this off, Jessica. I just wanted to ask, how important is it that firms support new talent, and for sort of, again, basically people within your positions to be role models for young professionals joining the industry? If you could kick that off, Jessica.
Yeah, it's really important. It's probably the most important part of our job, I feel. As a profession, we have a moral obligation to society, really. Across the profession, we take on thousands of young people each year, either school leavers or graduates. And, our qualification, our profession is a great solid grounding for people. And it's, the ethics behind it as well is great. So even people who don't stay in accountancy long term, if they decide to move on, the skills are transferable, and I think they're important skills to have. So it's incredibly important that we spend the time training and developing our new starters, our trainees, and make sure they get the support that they need. I think everyone will be in agreement that during lockdowns it's been more difficult. But it's something that we've had to prioritise and think outside the box as to how we train and develop and make sure people are still getting that support and, aren't being left behind in this sort of challenging environment. It's very easy for me to work in isolation at home. But, I had to make sure that I was giving my time to my colleagues and in particular, making sure as well the rest of the team were also giving their time and helping those that needed it, and making sure that on the job training, which is so vital, was still being given.
Yeah. Can I ask that, actually, maybe push this out more broadly to everyone else? How has that impacted kind of the training of younger recruits, considering that everybody had to shift to remote work? Has that impacted your ability to kind of, I guess, pass on your knowledge to the new wave of accountants joining your firms?
I think we particularly noticed that, definitely. And it wasn't, the remote working has a lot of benefits, but I have to admit that that wasn't one of them. We did feel there was a bit of a knowledge gap those first few months of lockdown. And it's quite understandable that, you know, a junior member of staff working remotely, it's just more difficult to ask questions. You know, even we've kind of returned to the office a kind of blended approach now, and already you're kind of just inherently noticing the difference of being able to shout across an open plan office just a daft question. You know, has anybody seen this before? What are you doing for this XYZ? And it's amazing how that remote working just completely not killed it, but it just made it more difficult. And I think some of the junior members of staff struggled with that, with the remote working, because they were isolated, working from home. You know, yes, okay, there was Teams and Zoom where you could call up your senior members of staff or ask a question, but it's just inherently more difficult, because people don't want to bother more senior members of staff. They don't want to, you know, be seen to be an inconvenience by asking these questions, which I thought was a real shame. So I do believe that as much as, you know, without the remote working, you know, it would have been a lot more difficult. You know, Teams was a saviour at the end of the day. I think it was a shame for a lot of the younger members of staff, or just the even newly qualified. I think it was something that we're now trying to remedy, in terms of making sure that they are supported, and if that means, you know, coming back into the office in a safe way, then that's something we're looking to kind of promote where we can and where it's possible to do so.
Mm-hmm. And Matthew, I kind of wanted to bring you into the conversation now. I know that you've got a few questions to ask the panel. Maybe you could kick one of those off.
Yeah, I mean, having recruited across the border pretty much all through lockdown, we saw a lot of obviously remote onboarding, and I think, as you mentioned already, past that onboarding process, you know, how did you sort of start to sort of build the sort of the structure within the teams? If you were doing it purely on Teams or Zoom, that's quite difficult. Did you go outside of that sort of mechanism to sort of start to build that sort of culture? Because that's quite hard to do if you're doing it remotely. Anyone out there that's sort of
we dealt with that. So yeah, we were recruiting right the way through, as you'd expect. So and not just grads who kind of come in at least as a cohort, so they've got their own kind of classmates, if you like, when they come in, which does help as a support mechanism. But particularly around the kind of newly qualified level, where we brought in a lot of people, and it was, I mean, it must have been brutal for them, because we moved people halfway around the world to come and work for us. We did that in COVID, and they're coming in, and they came in during lockdown, so they're sat in their flat or wherever they are, and they've never met anyone, and they could have been working for us for 3-4 months before they actually physically met someone, which is a disaster really from an onboarding perspective. So I guess there's a few things we did. So loads of dedicated proactive time put in. So every team proactively had slots in pretty much for a catch up and coaching. Whereas, you know, obviously if you're in the office, you would just ask the casual question. We had to be really proactive about it and actually schedule specific time for that. And then we kind of worried about the cultural piece as well and the social piece, because, you know, integrating new people into the team beyond just, you know, doing a bit of work. So we had quite a few sort of team events, virtual events. You know, we had suppliers send wine and cheese round to everyone, and we did a wine tasting, and I think we did cocktail making and all that kind of stuff. And we had to sort of really scratch our heads and think about what we could do. But the more stuff like that we were able to do, I think we did a coffee morning with directors. So I would jump on a call with 10 people selected at random from different grades, and we would just have a chat, and it wouldn't be about work, just, you know, how are things, how are the kids kind of thing. Yeah. So we had to do loads of different things like that to try and create that culture that you need.
Yeah, because you don't have a photocopy. Well, I'm showing my age now. You don't have a photocopier moment, do you? If you're working remotely, I mean, it's just not, you're not able to do that. So I guess you're scheduling everything. So make it more natural and, you know, and gel together a team. I guess you need to think outside the box a little bit.
exactly right.
How about you, Jess and Stu?
Yeah, we did very similar things. You know, we had to be proactive, and we did similar and sent out various food, drink, alcohol-related items, and had socials, and tried to come up with new ideas. But obviously, everyone else was doing the same. But yeah, we just tried as best we could to continue the culture that we had previously and encourage, levels and across departments to mix. We have a few different teams. We have a mental health first aid team, and we have a wellbeing team. Sorry, that's wellbeing and diversity team. So again, we were encouraging those teams to put on events and try to get different people involved to kind of continue that culture element that's difficult when you're all remote.
Yeah, that was quite similar to us, along with what became the bog standard Zoom quiz. There's a few other bits and pieces along the roads, but we kind of established, we always had done, to be fair, but kind of a buddy system for new starts as well, whereby if there's someone with little experience, there'd be quite a hands-on training. You have to always have one experienced person you could go to, so you didn't feel completely isolated, for example. So that we found that kind of worked well for us. So there was someone that was taking responsibility for checking in on people, and vice versa. There was always someone for a new start to go to for questions, and that seemed to work quite well.
And just sort of shifting the conversation again to something a little bit broader again, I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you feel that the industry has changed over the course of your careers, and more importantly, how you kind of see it evolving over the next sort of five to 10, if we can cast our minds that far forward.
I guess for me, so obviously coming up through the audit route, the level of regulation and the way that increased has just been astronomical over my career. And the level of work you have to do to get to a position where you can sign off an audit is just sort of exponentially more now. And also the cost of delivering an audit as a result is a lot more in terms of time. And I don't see that changing. I think that's just going to carry on that trajectory. We've got to kind of close that gap between public expectation and what we're actually doing. So I think that will carry on. I think there's new things that have come in. So the digital side of things, automation and skill sets that we need from people coming through around being able to code, being able to, Excel models are almost out of date now. They need to kind of work with new tools, and we need that skill set to come through in coding and things like that. And then the other one that's obviously close to my heart is the ESG side of things. So we're seeing all that regulation coming through at the moment. That's the first wave. The government released the other day a whole roadmap of what's to come over the next few years. So that's going to come thick and fast, and there's a huge role for accounting to play in that from the reporting side. So as those standards develop, there's going to be more and more emphasis on that. And I suspect even specific either modules or qualifications around it from accounting bodies as well. So that would be my thoughts.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something that I'd like to sort of shift focus towards as well. You said about how it's demanding different skills and competencies from new recruits. I guess obviously for those new wave of accountants, what are those skills and competencies that you think that they're going to need, considering the rise of automation, the impact of technology on the industry? Again, Matthew, maybe you're uniquely positioned to have an interesting insight into this, considering you're a director at the UK's leading accountancy practice and recruiter.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a fairly obvious and broad statement, I guess. It's being tech savvy, but it's maintaining that enthusiasm, not just about tech that's out there already, but tracking new tech and embracing that tech moving forwards. And I guess sort of as AI becomes more sophisticated, being able to use that in many ways to capitalize and potentially certainly give the edge over some of the competitors. The bigger firms clearly will have departments that are purely focusing on AI and have done for many, many years, to be fair. So it's not new to them. But I think for the smaller firms, mid-tier firms, it's really important that they're keeping up to date, spotting and seeing how those pieces of tech can move into their business and streamline, obviously. As a result of that, that's going to mean that soft skills, believe it or not, will play a really big part in the tech revolution. So as things become automated, listening objectively to new viewpoints, considering all the information, making sure you dispose of that across all the parties, streamlining decisions. A lot of staff are actually potentially overwhelmed by the fact that tech is here to stay and will continue, and they'll have to upskill. And obviously you mentioned coding as well. That's areas that certainly we're seeing are quite important to people. And as it becomes automated, with that, less obviously involvement in the pure sort of number counting side of things, and the advisory becomes really important, and it's spotting advisory through the data analysis, through collection of data, and being able to use that and using that efficiently, using it to revenue build as well. So the advisory side is particularly of interest to many, and using lots of tech to spot that and action on it very quickly. So I think it's really important that staff obviously are helped along the way, and if they feel, as I said, overwhelmed by some of the tech that's coming in place, that you're able to show empathy and feedback and support them, because it's here to stay and has been for some time and will continue. And as a result, I guess some of them will have to get used to it. We've seen a lot of, on smaller firms, actually a lot of M&A activity on the basis of tech coming into place, as well as MTD, and the fact that smaller firms are quite scared sometimes about the fact that this is coming into play, and would rather get out rather than have to fully embrace and potentially spend lots of money embracing new technology. So lots of forces at play there, but in the main, it's I would say it's maintaining that real enthusiasm for the current tech and embracing that too. Do you guys agree with that? Is that sort of something you've sort of experienced?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think coupled with that, people coming into the profession need to be willing to adapt to change, because it's only going to get change more. And I think, the speed at which we've evolved, because the flexible work has been forced upon us through lockdowns, that's pushed us probably 10 years quicker into more flexible working and being able to demonstrate we can all work remotely, flexibly. So I think that ability and willingness to change and adapt is super important for our profession, because, it's only going to continue.
And again, moving slightly on from there. So in light of the new pledge by accountancy bodies, including the ICAW and Ayre, to help drive the accounting industry towards net zero, I just wanted to ask sort of how crucial is the accountancy industry in supporting net zero efforts more broadly and helping businesses to shift towards sustainable business models and effective ESG reporting? Unsurprisingly, I'm going to turn to you, Harry, as I think you're probably best suited of anyone on our panel to kind of take that question on.
That's fair enough. I think I said in my introduction, but I'm actually on secondment working with Accounting for Sustainability, which is one of Prince Charles's organisations, and they are actually behind a lot of the accounting bodies issuing those net zero pledges. But to the question in terms of how important is the accountancy sector, I mean, it's absolutely vital. So when you look at ESG as a concept and specifically focusing on climate, and everyone's obviously wanting to reduce emissions, get to a net zero position, you cannot do that without reporting. Unless you know what you're currently doing in terms of emissions, you can't possibly manage those down to a net zero position. And the only people with the real skill set to do that are accountants. Because when you get into non-financial reporting, it's basically the mirror image of financial reporting. So you have underlying data, albeit it's not a number from an invoice, it's a greenhouse gas emission, but you need to get that number into a report in a way that you're happy that it's complete and accurate. And how do you do that? Well, you do that through processes and controls, which is exactly the same as we do in the finance function already. So every organization that I speak to that's grappling with the kind of ESG reporting issues, they're all internally turning to their finance team for help on this, because those guys have the skill set that can do it. So what we as a profession need to do is really pivot our skill set and apply it to non-financial reporting in the same way that we do with so much success financially. and we're just not going to get there without the accounting profession doing that. And Accounting for Sustainability is a huge kind of force from Prince Charles to help try and drive that initiative through, which I have to say set up in 2004, which is, I mean, the level of foresight there is incredible compared to the rest of us that have only been looking at this for the last few years in any great detail. So we're going to see a huge amount of change, especially with COP. So you're going to get the IFRS announce a Sustainability Standards Board. We're going to get a load of convergence around sustainability standards between the EU and IFRS. And we're going to see a whole raft of regulation coming through. It's already coming through in the UK. It's coming through in the EU. The SEC is consulting on it. So it's just going to become the norm. And that's great, because as a result of that, we're going to have a huge catalyst for change. Suddenly all the boards around the world that are currently absolutely blind to their emissions are going to have that information in front of them. And then strategies will come to play to decarbonise, and we'll get to net zero, hopefully.
Yeah. And Jessica, Stuart, anything else to add on that?
No, it's a long journey, but I think it's really important that I agree that we are the trusted advisors, and so the accountants have to be involved and have to be instrumental in the changes in attitude and make sure that everyone is compliant with the regulations and standards when they come in. I think that's really important. It's a long journey, and it's not going to be something that happens quickly, and it's not something that can, everyone's got to do a very little bit to begin with, and it will then get easier as we sort of go down the road. It's not something you can just, reduce to net zero and then that's it. It will be a long path, and it will change along the way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I say, we definitely, we just mid-tier sort of firms, but we're already kind of seeing, definitely from a strategic and advisory point of view, a lot of clients asking the questions. So we have to be on the ball in terms of that stuff as well. So whether it be advising on available subsidies in relation to sort of climate schemes or, carbon credits, clients come in talking about getting down to sort of net zero. We're very much sort of having to stay sort of right on the curve in terms of your knowledge and being able to advise from a sort of financial benefit as well as the the actual ESG side of things. So it's definitely this. It's filtering into other aspects of our work, and you can see it right across the service lines, whether it be sort of the wealth management side of things, ethical investing. Some of the larger audit clients are obviously more aware of what they're reporting, and right down we've got a lot of sort of agricultural and sort of smaller companies, smaller entities, looking at, well, what happens, when our subsidies that are traditionally available, when they phase out, what are we doing? Like, are we going to be able to survive if the sort of nature of the grants and the various funding available changes to a sort of more climate-based approach? So it's definitely something we're seeing more and more often these days, even at a firm of our size as well.
And just moving on, Matthew, do you have any additional questions for the panel?
Yeah, I think question to you all really would be, if there was, congratulations on getting to this stage in your careers, and an amazing achievement. But if there's anything that you might have done differently up until this point that you feel could really have stood you in good stead, it may not be anything. You are perfect as you are, I'm sure. So, but if there's any tips that potentially individuals coming up the ranks might be able to invest in now, do you think you could identify any of those?
I think just being open and aware of other routes into accountancy is probably one where, university versus apprenticeship being a big difference between when I was at university and the number of apprenticeships available, and even knowing about that, frankly, versus now. There's been a big shift, and I think just being aware of the different routes into accountancy in that respect, and other relevant work experience you could do at an earlier stage, and I think just understanding where accountancy could take you, because I think when I trained and knew I was going to pick that as a profession while I was at university, I don't think I had an idea of that might end me up in corporate finance at the end of the day. I didn't particularly know that, but it's quite nice in hindsight if I'd understood the different paths you could take. So I think just absorbing as much information and understanding the onward journeys you could take to get into the profession.
It's a tough question, because often you're mistakes and, you know, days where you perhaps don't perform as well as you think you could have are probably the days that you learn the most. And I think if I would go back to myself when I first started the career, I think I'd probably say to myself, don't be so worried about making mistakes and ask as many questions as you possibly can, because I've learned you only really learn through experience, and trying to gain as many experiences as possible is the way to develop and learn. So it's perhaps maybe I would have not done things and not taken opportunities through, you know, I didn't appreciate how important they were, or because I was perhaps thinking that, you know, it was an uncomfortable situation, or, you know, that sort of thing. That maybe if I'd have taken those situations, might not have done so well or looked so good, but I would have learned a lot. So that's probably what I would say.
Yeah, and building on this, I guess, sort of stealing your question a little bit, Matthew, I just wondered if what advice would you all give to young people considering joining the industry? Again, sort of tying in quite nicely with Matthew's question.
I mean, I guess first I'd encourage them to join the industry, because I think it's one of the few industries where you can be a professional but go down so many different paths as to what your career actually looks like, and you've got a good spectrum of that on the call today, actually. I guess the only other thing I'd say is sort of be patient as you're going through it. You know, you've got that long slog to get your qualification, but then your path, even after that, when you're newly qualified, isn't always that clear. And quite a lot of people make fairly rash decisions quite quickly after qualifying, that they don't necessarily always look back on fondly. So I would say be patient and take your time to figure out what you're going to do and make use of the opportunities that are available to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. I think there is so many opportunities, and I think, you know, my words of advice would be, it's okay not to know what you want to do. Drink in the experience, try different service lines, you know, enjoy learning, because chances are if you spend some time in one industry, you might not end up enjoying it as much, but it's also applicable, you know, across services, that you can use your knowledge elsewhere, whether it be within the profession itself or just in industry. There's so much value you can add to different, you know, sectors and processes and ways of doing things that, yes, it's absolutely, it's a great qualification to have. It's a great profession to be in, because like you say, there's so much opportunity in it, effectively.
And Meera, any final thoughts from you?
I think just to build on that slightly more, you know, it's not just the technical skills, right? It's the commercial ones that you gather as you're learning how to speak to clients, and you know, increasing your responsibility. Those are all transferable skills, and I think sometimes we get sort of bogged down in considering a career in accountancy when thinking just about the ACA, but just broaden that up into, actually, it's not that I'm just an accountant, which I think can have a certain type of branding, but looking at all the positives that brings, you know, because it isn't just the technical knowledge, it's the commerciality that you still use. I still use today, and I'm grateful for that grounding. So I think being aware of that as part of your decision making is a bit of extra advice I'd give.
I'd just like to end things by thanking everyone involved in the discussion today, and I'd also like to thank all of the winners of this year's 35 under 35, and of course I'd like to thank our sponsor AJ Chambers. Until next year, everyone, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much.